Hi and welcome back to the Early Bird Photo News. I hope you're all having a great day. I'm still busily working on my video comparing all the different zoom lenses and some prime lenses like the new Nikon 180 to 600mm lens, 100 to 400mm lenses, the Canon 100 to 500mm lens, and some others. It's becoming quite a big video, and so I want to give it a bit more time, but I'm hopeful that I can post it by the weekend and that it will give you a nice comprehensive review and overview of all these different lenses and how they compare and which one might be the best for you. So stay tuned for that. Working on that video about the lenses also made me realize that I never really talked much about the Canon R8. I'm not planning to do a full review at this stage, but I thought today I'm going to share my thoughts and experiences with that camera so far. I must say, I'm quite impressed by it overall. For the price point, it offers amazing capabilities, even though it's quite limited in some other areas as well. What stands out about the R8 is the amazing sensor and autofocus straight from the great Canon R6 Mark II. Having a camera that costs just $1,500 that has an autofocus system that finds a subject with ease and tracks it very well and such a good sensor is pretty amazing. The R8 also has fantastic video features, pretty much exactly the same ones from the R6 Mark II with oversampled 4K for instance, but no 4K 120 frames per second unfortunately. Interestingly, Canon left out the IBIS from the R8, so there is no in-body image stabilization, which definitely affects your ability to handhold video and have low shutter speed photography. So this will be a little bit more limited on the camera because there will simply be more shake introduced because the only image stabilization you have will be from your lenses. Looking at the back of the R8, we see that it's pretty bare actually. There's no joystick and it doesn't have the third wheel on the back, and for camera bodies, I actually like having third wheels because it's so much easier to shoot full manual if you have 3 wheels on the camera, whereas the R8 only has the 2 wheels on top of the camera. So you have to adjust your workflow and where your hands go a little bit with this camera because no joystick and no third wheel is definitely quite different to most of the other Canon camera bodies. If I had a choice, I wish that Canon would definitely just have sort of the same concept across all camera bodies because it would make it a lot easier to own different bodies and still be able to use them like with your eyes closed in the field. Having all these different cameras like R5, R6, R7, R8, R10 with all kind of different or slightly different sort of handling concepts can make it quite difficult if you use few of them at the same time, and I would definitely prefer having the same concept across all camera bodies. So while the design of the camera is not ideal, you can still definitely work very well with it in the field, especially because of the good autofocus. With some other cameras, you have to move the autofocus points around a lot and then a joystick is quite helpful. But with the R8 or R6 Mark II as well, the autofocus is so good that most of the time it just jumps onto your subject right away. So you don't really have the need to move the autofocus points around too much. The main reason I'm not interested in the R8 and what concerns me a little bit about it in the field is the smaller batteries. They don't last very long and I really don't want to get a new camera where I have to buy a few new spare batteries and need different chargers. So that's for me is one of the reasons I'm not so much interested in an R8, and if I was going down that route I would probably get an R6 Mark II instead, simply because it's more similar to use to my R5s and I can use all the batteries that I already have. The EVF on the R8 is quite low resolution and quite small as well, but you only really notice the difference if you use it side by side with like an R5 that has a bigger and higher resolution viewfinder. So by itself in the field, I think the EVF is adequate. Interestingly, the R8 doesn't come with a mechanical shutter, and the only options we have is the first curtain electronic shutter and the full electronic shutter. The first curtain electronic shutter has the advantage that we can shoot at 14-bit RAW files, but it only shoots at 6 frames per second, which is very slow for today's standards. The electronic shutter, on the other hand, shoots at up to 40 frames per second, which is awesome, but then you're only getting 12-bit RAW files. So it's a little bit of a quality difference there, but I would still opt to shoot with the 40 frames per second, especially if you shoot wildlife and action, because you get so many more frames compared to just 6 frames per second. With the fast frame rate also comes a bottleneck in the camera, which is the buffer. It's relatively small, so if you're shooting full RAW and 40 frames per second, you will hit it within like a second or 2 seconds. So that's not ideal. So I would recommend using CRAW for smaller files and then a bigger buffer that lets you shoot about 100 RAW files. So it's not ideal, but at least with like 100 files, you can shoot for 2 or 3 seconds, which should be enough in most cases, hopefully. All in all, the R8 seems like quite an amazing little camera that definitely punches above its weight when it comes to the sensor and the autofocus system. That's basically unheard of in this sort of $1,500 category. There's not really any other camera that has such good image quality and such good autofocusing at that sort of price point. Would you agree? Let me just show you real quick now how easy and effective image editing can be if you learn it the right way. I'm starting off with my presets that I just install in Photoshop or Lightroom, and then they show up in the drop-down menu where I can pick the right one for each image and get perfect colors and a great starting point for the editing process in just one click. And from there, if you follow my masterclass workflow, it's just a few more steps to make your images stand out with nice and vibrant colors, perfect brightness, and great contrast. So if that's of interest to you, make sure to check these out down in the description. And if there's ever something in your way, I also teach you how to remove that very quickly. Let's talk a little bit about the Canon R5, one of my favorite cameras in the field that has delivered me endless amazing photos. But lately I've been using a lot of Nikon Z8s and Z9s, and that has clearly showed me some shortcomings of the R5 that I would definitely want to see addressed in an R5 Mark II, and I wanted to discuss these with you guys today. And if you have any other suggestions of what should be changed or addressed in an R5 Mark II, make sure to let me know in the comments. Well, there's a few obvious things that we would want to see in an R5 Mark II, like audible shutter, pre-burst, improved autofocusing, 14-bit RAW files across the board. There's a few things that actually are a lot more annoying in the field that sometimes prevent me from taking great images with the R5, and those are the ones that I truly want to see addressed. And the first of that is the buffer in the R5. The problem is not so much the size of the buffer. You can actually work with the size of the buffer, but there's one big problem with Canon cameras, and that is whenever you hit the zero, whenever you completely fill up the buffer, there is quite a bit of lag. That can be 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds depending on your card and the camera that you're using before you can actually take another image again. You're basically sitting there with a camera that won't do anything. You can't change it to anything. It's just writing to the card, and it's basically you just dead in the water, which is super annoying and has cost me a lot of images in the field. If you don't fully hit the buffer, so it doesn't say 0 at the bottom, then you can still keep shooting. But whenever you hit 0, there is a very annoying and quite long delay. And this is done much better in Nikon and Sony cameras. On a Z8, for instance, you can basically never hit the buffer. And even if you hit the buffer, the camera still keeps shooting at a reduced frame rate so that you never completely miss out on a scene like you do with an R5, for instance. And that's something that I would definitely want to see addressed with an R5 Mark II. Some sort of solution that you can continuously shoot even if it's at a lower frame rate or a much larger buffer, or something else that prevents the camera completely from freezing up like it currently does on all Canon camera bodies whenever you hit 0. This is definitely something that's quite annoying. I would love to see go away. Another area I would definitely want to see addressed in an R5 Mark II is these annoying image wobbles. Because of the slow readout speed of most Canon sensors combined with the rolling shutter and the IBIS, you get a lot of annoying image wobbles when you do burst of photos. It kind of distorts each image. So if you look at each image by itself, it's not too bad, but if you go through burst of images, you can see this wobbling all over the place. And this is something most Sony and Nikon cameras don't have, at least not the higher end ones, like an A1 or an A9 Mark II don't have it, and the Z8 and the Z9 with their stacked sensor don't have it at all. So this is something I'm very hopeful that Canon will address, even though I'm not entirely sure, because I'm not sure that we will actually get a stacked sensor in the R5 Mark II. I would personally hate not to have one, but I don't know which way Canon is going to go. So fingers crossed we're going to get a stacked sensor and these wobbles will be addressed, but I guess only time will tell. But it's definitely one of those things that I would love to see go away, especially because none of the competition has any of these annoying wobbles. And lastly, I sometimes wish my R5 would just turn on much faster. Sometimes it turns on quite fast, but other times it feels like it takes an eternity to turn on. So other cameras turn on much faster, and I think this should actually really be an easy fix to somehow have the R5 Mark II turn on much faster in the field. So these are 3 key areas for me that affect my work in the field the most. A lot of the other features we want to see in an R5 Mark II would be great to have, but they don't actually affect you in the field work as much as some of these wobbles and especially the buffer issue. So what are some of the issues that you want to see resolved in an R5 Mark II or added to an R5 Mark II? I'm sure improved autofocus, audible shutter, pre-burst, 14-bit RAW files across the board are the main ones. Have I missed any ones? Let me know in the comments. What makes me hopeful that Canon will produce a very nice R5 Mark II that has maybe even a stacked sensor is the fact that Nikon placed the Z8 right in that sort of bracket where the R5 sits as well. With a price of $4,000, the Z8 is the first camera in that sort of range that has a stacked sensor and a lot of these other amazing features that we would love to see in an R5 Mark II, like 14-bit RAW files all across the board, no buffer issues. So hopefully Canon will look at the Nikon Z8 and how well it's selling and think we need to add some of these features to the R5. So fingers crossed we're going to get a stacked sensor and all around ripper R5 Mark II camera. Last week I mentioned that Canon pulled the firmware for the R5C because of an issue, but this week they released a new firmware that hopefully fixes all the issue and it should be safe to install now. So if you have an R5C, it might be worth updating now. Canon also recently achieved an amazing milestone with 110 million cameras produced and 160 million interchangeable lenses being produced. This is just crazy numbers. And I remember getting this model in 2006 where Canon celebrated just 30 million EF lenses sold. So it's been a few years and a lot of extra lenses produced, which is pretty cool. I would have never thought that they produced this many lenses, would you? It looks like next week will be quite exciting for Sony shooters with the announcement of the A6700 scheduled for July 12th. And from all we've seen from that camera, it sounds like it's going to be pretty interesting. It will have a bigger body compared to the A6600. It will have 26 megapixels APS-C sensor, 7-stop IBIS and super fast autofocus. So all in all, I think that sounds pretty exciting and it could be a very interesting camera for a lot of wildlife shooters if it can deliver in the field. Are you excited about that camera? Are you thinking about getting it? I think it looks like Sony is onto a winner because it also seems to have great video specs with 6K video and 4K 120 frames per second available as well. And on that note, it's time to wrap up this week's early bird photo news. I'm going to edit this video now and I hope you're going to check out some of my other videos. Leave me a comment with all your thoughts and hit that subscribe button right now and I will see you in the next video very soon. Bye.